Hi everyone, thanks very much for your patience, really appreciate that. Welcome to today's webinar, as I said earlier, on automating clash detection and data validation within 3D Repo. I'll be your host today. I'm the commercial director at 3D Repo. And I've also got with me Matt Osment, who's our product director. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. You will see within the Zoom environment there's a Q&A section, so if we could keep the questions coming in throughout, we will have a couple of pauses during the presentations to answer those, and we'll pick out the ones that are relevant. The more general ones we'll save till the end. But yeah, just keep them coming in as we go. It'd be really good to see how much we get. And finally, we do also have some polls that will be popping up at various stages throughout this, just getting some feedback from you guys on how you're currently working within these processes that we'll be showing, just to get us some feedback. So on with the presentation. As I said, I'm the commercial director, and with me is Matt Osment, product director, who'll be looking at the more technical side and going through the demos as we move through this presentation. So today's agenda, I'll be taking you through a quick introduction to 3D Repo. I think looking at the attendees, most of you already know 3D Repo pretty well, but we'll just have a look at the platform and remind you of that. Then I'll look in more detail at 3D Repo and specifically the issue tracking process and how that currently works within the environment and the kind of external ecosystem as well. Then I'll hand over to Matt, who will look at the automated data validation process within 3D Repo, how you can set that up and how you can get the reports out. Then he'll move on to look at some research we're currently doing into how we can also automate the clash detection process, both in terms of the actual clashing and the dissemination of the issues and feedback from the field. And then finally, we'll come to that Q&A. There will be a few shorter Q&A sessions in between after each one of these presentations. So do keep them coming in all the way through. Don't wait till the end, because it might be better for us to do it during those sections. So introducing 3D Repo, I always like to start with why we do what we do, because I think it's important to the whole process that we're showing today. And the first reason is that most BIM software is just far too complex. So we have great tools that we'll be talking about today, like Revit and Navisworks, Solibri, great for the BIM professional. Where 3D Repo sits, though, is how do we connect that information to the rest of the project team? So the idea being that anyone can get access to the same information that the BIM team do through their expensive and complicated BIM tools. What we find is if we don't do that, then BIM just creates another silo of people within the project team who have access to certain bits of information and others who don't. We also note that interoperability is really hard. We won't be touching on this too much today, but 3D Repo does support a very wide range of different formats, allowing them all to be federated together in one environment where you can all collaborate. But we also think that it's really important that data is non-proprietary. So even when you do give us something like a Revit or a Navisworks file that we upload to the 3D Repo environment, we do then store that as open data within the database that you can access and pull out either via the API or via the tools that 3D Repo offers. And finally, every project is different. So I mentioned it there, 3D Repo does API first development. So everything that we do is available via an API and can be integrated into your existing processes and other tools, which is something that Matt will be concentrating a bit on today. So the platform itself, as I said, we take in various different file types from various different vendors and serve them up through the web browser to 3D Repo IO, which is the tool we'll be talking about today, and specifically around the kind of clash and data validation and issues workflow. We do have other products, and our customers have built other products on top of the platform as well. So we built Planbase a few years ago for the London Mayor's Office around community engagement on models. We also had 3D Send, the tool for sharing 3D models in a free like WeTransfer environment. And all of these are built on Unity. So we also have access to Unity and now Unreal Engine plugins to pull your data directly from the cloud into these tools and create your own digital twin apps, which is how our customers tend to do their custom work on top of the platform. So that's all held together via the API, which allows us to integrate in with many different tools. And we'll be looking or talking a lot about this today, about how we integrate in with the existing authoring and model checking tools like Navisworks and Revit, but also how we can pull data out at the end of the process into the more reporting tools like Excel, Google Sheets, Power BI, those sorts of things, to be able to disseminate the data out further than people who just want to see it within a 3D model. In terms of security, I know definitely looking down this list, there's a few people who will be interested in this. We have ISO 9001 and 27001 certification. We also have Cyber Essentials, and all of the software is developed in the UK by our UK-based software development team. And any data that you upload to 3D Repo is always encrypted, whether that's when it's being stored on our database or when it's being transferred to you via HTTPS. In terms of hosting, most people who use 3D Repo are hosted on our London AWS servers. There is an instance out in Montreal as well for the North American clients, and there are other instances popping up, but wherever you choose to put your data at the start is where it will stay. It doesn't get moved around in any way. And you can also choose to privately host 3D Repo, either as a kind of infrastructure as a service type thing, where we set it up for you on another cloud provider, or even on-premise with our support as well. So to allow for all different levels of security that you might have on different projects. So now looking a bit deeper into 3D Repo and the issue tracking process. So I guess it all starts with how we get data into 3D Repo. So 3D Repo is a federation tool. So it allows us to bring in models from various different formats, either via plugins with the native authoring tools or directly uploading them. And then 3D Repo will federate that together to give you that environment where you can look at issues between different models. And then within 3D Repo, there is an issue tracker. So here we can identify issues directly within the web browser, mark them up, assign them to people, and have a full audit trail of the conversation around that issue. So it becomes almost like a golden thread of information around either the issue or as well within our safety-based tool, which we're not talking about today, but more around the risk side of things as well. So in terms of how that works in the wider ecosystem, we've got the 3D Repo database, which we've spoken about, and then around that is the 3D Repo issues API. So this is where the issues are held and how we interact with the issues, either inside or outside of 3D Repo. So within 3D Repo, there's a number of tools that you might use to find issues and then create them within the environment. So the first one is just the web viewer. So what we find is actually with 3D Repo's idea of being a tool that everyone can use, and getting it out away from the BIM team, a lot of the issues that get raised actually aren't to do with things like clash detection or data validation. They're more to do with constructability and issues that are found due to people's specialist knowledge. So just being able to get the models out to a wider audience creates a way of creating issues before you get to site. But we also have a number of tools that people can use within the platform to analyze the models. So the first one is 3D Diff. So this allows us to see the differences between two models to see where the changes have occurred between revisions. This is almost like redlining for the model. So when we get a model, we don't have to review the whole thing. We just review what's changed and make sure that one, the changes that we asked for have happened, and two, there hasn't been any inadvertent changes we weren't expecting from revision to revision. If there has, then that's where we can start raising issues around change problems. We also have the built-in data validation via smart groups. Matt will be talking a lot more about this, but this allows you to set up rules directly within the environment to check for the asset data behind your model to make sure that it's compliant, and also more recently check external data as well that might have been imported into 3D Repo. So if you have things like production information or manufacturer's information that you want to input into the model, there is an API for that now to append that to a revision, and then you can subsequently check it using the data validation tools. And finally, we now have the ability to do 4D, either via Synchro or via importing a schedule into the API and matching it up with the model. This is important for issue tracking because especially at the construction phase or pre-construction, the fact that a model exists is one thing, but a lot of the issues that are created around the sequence and way that it's going to be built. So being able to disseminate out a 4D model to people to see the intention on how to build the thing actually creates a lot more issues as well that can be added to the system. So that's just to talk about how it can work outside of, I guess, the clash and data validation process that we're talking about today. Within the actual wider ecosystem, though, we do have a number of ways that other tools can interact. So on the model checking side and authoring, we do support the BCF format. So where you want to bring issues in from Celebri, they can come in via BCF, managed within the 3D Repo issue tracker. and then sent out back to the authoring tools like ArchiCAD, Tekla, Vectorworks, the ones that support the BCF workflow natively. Obviously, for those that don't, predominantly being in the Autodesk environment, we have created plugins. So you can download those directly from the App Store or our website that will allow you direct access to the same issues that you've created in 3D Repo, or allow you to push issues from Navisworks, identify an issue in Navisworks, create it in 3D Repo directly within the Navisworks environment, and then pick it up again in Revit. And these can be mix and matched as well. So it is possible to bring in issues from Navisworks via the plugin and then export them out via BCF to ArchiCAD, for instance, and vice versa. You can bring in issues from Solibri via BCF, manage them, and then view them using the plugin in Revit. And then finally, the other part that we'll be talking a bit about today is the reporting side of this. So this is either via exports or plugins with tools to be able to interact with that data. So for instance, within Excel, we have a bi-directional plugin or a bi-directional integration so that you can pull issues down into Excel, edit them, make changes, create new ones, and push it back up to 3D Repo again. And then there's more reporting style tools like Power BI, where we can pull down the issues into a dashboard and view them directly there, and combine them again with the model viewer using our Power BI model viewer as well. So I think that's it from my side of the presentation. Matt, if you're ready, I'll hand over to you to go on with the live demo portion.
Yep, great. Thanks, Andrew. 1 second. Let me just swap the screen.
Do keep the questions coming in.
Sorry, I was all ready to go and realized I wasn't sharing my screen. Oh, Andrew, I think you need to enable my screen sharing.
Okay.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yep, perfect. Can you see that then, Andrew?
No.
Sorry, 1 second. Oh, there we
go. Yeah, I see a desktop.
Sorry, guys. This is there we go. Okay.
There you go.
Should be all right. Sorry about that. Always a trouble when we're trying to, Andrew and I are trying to run the webinar without the marketing team today, so it's all a bit cowboy operation. So yeah, hopefully you can see my video now. So this is a little tagline that we've kind of been using internally to discuss some of the work we're doing with automation and model validation and stuff, clash detection, and it really talks to what 3D Repo is good at. More eyes, less clicks. So we want more people to see the results of what 3D models inside the construction industry can offer, but we want them to do so by clicking less. We don't want to create mundane processes where you need to employ a whole new person, or your BIM manager has to commit their time to running a particular process. So with that, first of all, a little bit about why we look at automation here at 3D Repo as an example project, and this is just looking at some of the projects we work with on 3D Repo and some examples of how many models we have. So for argument's sake, we've got 100 models across 4 design packages, 5 different file formats. So that's something that 3D Repo really excels at, as Andrew mentioned. And then often we see either 2 or 4 week update cycles in these models. So we're getting new revisions, not necessarily understanding what's in each new revision, but all we know is we're getting a new release, a new tranche of models every 2 weeks. And for argument's sake, this is a 1-year project. So if you add all that up, you've got 2,600 unique model uploads. Now, if someone was to spend an hour looking at each one of those model uploads, that's a full-time job. And if you build up on top of that, if you have to then run clash detections, and I know this is an extreme example, some people out there might be going, oh, well, we don't actually have 100 models and they're not updated that often, but just as an example, and if you wanted to spend 2 hours looking at each one of those models, that's 2 full-time jobs. So as the industry moves closer and closer towards digitalization, we're not going to have the resources to keep up with the work that needs to be done if we maintain the same manual processes we've got today. So automation is pretty much inevitable, or at least we think it is, and that's why we're kind of here helping to show you how 3D Repo can contribute to your automation processes. So what could you automate in this world? So first of all, model uploads, simplest thing, either from your computer or from a common data environment into 3D Repo. Next up, data validation. So what we're going to show you in a bit, when those models land, how do you assess whether or not they're good for sharing or good for distribution? And then sharing, you could have hundreds and hundreds of people on a job, and depending on what models change and what the changes are, you might want to distribute those models to different people. You might also need to remove access. So you've got people coming and going from jobs, coming and going from subcontractors, from consultants. We need to be able to remove those quickly. Integrations, APIs are a massive thing now in the industry. I'm going to show you on the next screen all the common data environments that use APIs these days. It's getting increasingly common. So we want to integrate 3D Repo with all of your existing software. You might want to update element information. If you go back to our 4.26 webinar that we did when we had a new release, I go into a bit of detail about how you can now inject additional metadata into 3D models that's stored in 3D Repo. So things like updating quality assurance documentation from site into the model, managing offsite construction. So when your factory says a particular modular component is complete and perhaps in situ on the way to site, you could update that in the model and color code accordingly. And then one of the key things that we're working with a lot of customers at the moment on is compiling contract. So no matter what your new world process is, and I've got an example of how we use safety base in 3D Repo, you may still have old school or old world contract deliverables. So we want to make sure that you can still work in the new world, but that you can kind of retrofit the output into your old world deliverables so that you're not spending time generating generating documentation just for the sake of a contract. So the first thing I'm going to look at today is model uploads. Andrew and I have harped on about this point quite a lot, but it bears discussing further. So all of the software you can see on my screen now, they all have APIs, and some of those are construction specific, like Think Project or the Autodesk packages. Some of them less so, Dropbox and Google Drive. A lot of people will say they're not fit for construction, but we still get people sending models around via these platforms. So because all of these have APIs, you can quite simply take the models from those platforms and push them into 3D Repo. And then once they're in 3D Repo, you could do all of the things that Andrew mentioned earlier. So you could share across a wider team. And because 3D Repo is web-based, all that can happen via URLs. So you can start sending URLs out of particular model viewpoints across teams. So you're bringing those people to the 3D table that maybe didn't have specific software installed on their computer before, don't have Navisworks, don't want to spend ages downloading the latest versions of the model files. That's one of the things we think is key about the model upload integration, is that from that point on, once you've set this integration up, you know that anyone with that URL going to that endpoint is going to get the latest version of the model. So you de-risk the project by not having people just opening whatever model they happen to have on their computer rather than going to the common data environment and downloading the latest one. So on to how you can manage those integrations. So we've got a few different ways we manage automation here at 3D Repo, and our customers do it differently as well. So first up is things like Excel. You can use Power Query inside Excel to start pulling data down from 3D Repo and doing some really clever stuff there. You can pull millions of records out of 3D Repo, get them into Power Query in Excel, and then start creating pivot tables, all that stuff. And that takes 5 minutes. So if you want to do stuff like metadata, which I'll show you in a minute, or tracking issues, you can do that in Excel. Next up is this increasing rise of no-code workflow systems like Microsoft Power Automate, MuleSoft. We've got Integramat, which I think recently got valued at like $6 billion. So this is a massive industry, and across other industries where, like manufacturing, they're increasingly moving to these kind of workflow management systems to offload some of the more mundane processes from staff. And then the third example we've got here is then the more in-depth version where you're starting to build code out, and all of 3D Repo's endpoints, anything you can do in 3D Repo in the browser has its endpoint exposed, which means you can then take that and either build it in those no-code platforms, or you can interact with them in code. And where we've built code for customers before, like I mentioned before, those model uploads taking a full-time job essentially to manage or validate them. We've had customers where we've spent 5 days building custom code that we've then deployed onto servers. That then will do some kind of process. So whether it's grabbing model files, automatically validating them. And those 5 days very quickly pay for themselves, because that code can then be transposed across multiple projects. Even on a single project, you'll see the payback. So although it seems complex to look and go, oh, well, we don't have software developers in-house, the payback is massive, so it's worth looking into. So once we've got the models into 3D Repo, one of the main automation processes we look at is model validation. Why we look at model validation is because increasingly the model is the basis for downstream processes. So you're starting to do way more with your models downstream. That means that the model has to be good, because otherwise you're building processes on top of poor foundations. So it's important to make sure that you validate those models the moment they come in, so that you can continue to work on your new processes. You've got quantifiable contract deliverables, so you have agreements with your consultants, or if you are a consultant, you have agreements with your contractor, and typically those are documented in the BIM execution plan, the BEP. And by quantifying them, you're able to go back to that stakeholder and say, okay, here are the issues and it's quantifiable, rather than just saying, we don't think this is good enough. That 2-week cycle that I mentioned before is critical, because once you're on that 2-week cycle, ideally, you want to get any issues resolved on day 1, so that they've got basically the majority of 2 weeks to then correct them before the next release. Because if you miss that 2-week cycle, you're then on the next cycle and hoping you get into there. So anything you can do as quickly as possible is really going to impact your lead times. And then latent defects. What we don't want to do is build issues into 3D models, no one notice them, get to the construction phase, build off of those models, or build off of the drawings that have been extracted from the models, and not realize that a simple authoring issue has then resulted in a construction issue. So with that in mind, I'm going to jump into a quick demo, and then I'll take some questions. So just get. So hopefully everyone can see this. So this is 3D Repo. Hopefully everyone has used 3D Repo at some point.
Yep. Matt, we can still see your presentation, or at least I can.
Oh, sorry, I must have been sharing the. I was on the wrong screen. There we go. Can you see that now?
That's it. Yeah.
Lovely. Sorry. Yeah, so this is 3D Repo. This is the new V5 interface, which we've been rolling out to selected customers, but we're going to push out to a wider audience at the end of the year. Don't worry if you've had a lot of training in the older V4 interface that we call it. We're still going to be allow people to revert back to that. So if you're not ready to make the move, we can. You're not being forced to. So yeah, we've got the model in view here. As I mentioned before, you've got the URL at the top there to show that I can share that with anyone. We've got a lot of metadata associated with these models. And in this instance, hypothetically, we've asked our contractors to fill in some particular metadata that's going to help those downstream processes I mentioned. So we're asking for a design ID. We want to know what level the model's on. We want to know, of course, what material it's made out of. And I think actually if I select this one, there's an additional bit. And we want to know what construction phase this particular element is being. Then, using 3D Repo's smart groups, I can come in and create smart groups which check particular things. So in this case, I'm checking the casework to see whether it has a design ID. Or in the case of the columns, I can see if I jump into this group, the rule set here is anywhere where the category is columns, but it doesn't include a bit of data which is called the design ID. And that's an issue because I'm then using that design ID later down to do QA reports or quantification and things like that. What you can also do if you've got numbers in your metadata, you can do ranges, greater than, less than. So if you're expecting slabs to be of a certain thickness, you can say, highlight in red where the thickness is outside of the range that I was expecting. That then gives you the option to highlight these objects. So I can highlight anywhere where the columns have failed. I can even isolate them so that I can see just the failed columns here. And I can come in and I can just search for failures. And I can select all of my validation failures. And then if I go back to show more, and then I can see in the model in red everywhere in the model where there's been a particular failure. And I can see if I dive into one of these elements here, this slab, for instance, if I go into the metadata, you can see that it's missing one of the 4 bits of information that I wanted. All of these rules, and we've covered this before, we can export these rules to a standard file format called a JSON file. And that is these rules represented in data format. So if you wanted to import these onto another project so that you can run the same rules on a different project, or if you wanted to edit these rules in a text environment or an Excel environment or anything like that, you can start to do that and manage the rules. So if you're currently working in Celebri and you've got 10,000 rules that you use to manage your model metadata, we can easily work on a process that brings those over to the 3D Repo method without having to sort of force you to re-enter them all inside 3D Repo. Once you've got the model validation done in 3D Repo, you can then start to use our integrations to pull that out into other tools. So the easiest one that I mentioned earlier is Power BI. Is Power Query in Excel. So this is a quick example of it. Sorry. Sorry, my Excel stopped working. So I'm going to show you it in Power BI. So this is the model validation dashboard, a quick one that we've got in Power BI. This is using Power BI online. So anyone with this link can then that's got access to your projects in Power BI can then access this dashboard. You can even, as part of a workflow, push this dashboard to people, send them emails if they have a particular number of failures. You can say, here's an email, you should go in and check this. And I can see all of the rules I've got, how many objects have failed. I could even start generating a list of the objects, start assigning them to people, potentially create a workflow where I create issues inside 3D Repo. So because all that data is exposed via our API, because you've got these no-code platforms like Integromat and Power Automate, you can really start to customize the process of how you run model validation in 3D Repo. So 3D Repo is not a prescriptive platform. We're not telling you to run a process in a particular way. We're kind of trying to understand how you want to run your process and build your integrations on top of that. I did mention that we were going to have questions in the middle. I think Andrew mentioned, but I think what we're going to do is just skip through the clash detection workflow just for time's sake, and then we'll cover the questions at the end.
Matt, do you want to quickly just run a couple of the polls on integration and data validation, because you're the host
sure
now.
Okay, so let's launch the integration one. So hopefully everyone should have up on their screen a quick question and answer about how your current processes are integrated. We're really trying to understand where the market is, because we think integrations are really powerful, and it's always easier to add integrations once you've already got existing integrations. Once you've built your first integration, your second, third, fourth, 10th, 100th is quite straightforward. So it's good to understand where people are. So I'll just give a little bit more time for people to answer that question. And then while we're waiting, just a quick talk about where we could go with validation in the future. We want to be able to push those reports that we can create back into the common data environment potentially, so that weekly you could have reports sitting there, or after that 2-weekly process, the report goes back into your common data environment. So you've got a record every 2 weeks of what happened, how the validation process, whether it was successful or unsuccessful. You can create emails and Microsoft Teams integrations to directly alert people if models have failed. Also, if you're looking to move away from rules, so obviously everyone's aware of the kind of trend towards machine learning and what would be possible, and hopefully we're going to be doing an event at Google's office in a couple of months, I think, where we talk a little bit more about machine learning and what we can do with Google Cloud's offering. But the key thing here is, in order to get to that sort of panacea of machine learning based validation, you need to create your training data. And the way to create the training data is to set up the rules today, put the hard yards in, so that in 2, 3, 4 years' time, your machine learning processes can be built on top of that. Okay, so I'm just going to end the poll there. So really interesting. We've kind of got across the board, we've got about a fair share between people that aren't doing any integration, people that aren't but are trying, and that's really the part of the target we're looking at today is how to give people more ammunition to go to either their IT departments or their digital departments and say, look, we really need this. This is really going to save us some time. So that's really useful. So I'll jump into the crash detection stuff now. So speaking back to what we talked about with automation, talk about clash detection. So clash detection, hopefully, is a lot of people see is it's quite a repetitive process. It's time critical because we've got those 2-week loops again, and we've got interdisciplinary teams. We really want to make sure that we're getting back to people as soon as possible with their hard clashes to make sure that they're resolving them in the next release. We've got multiple file formats coming from multiple shareholders, and sharing clashes is critical to the workflow to getting things resolved. And we want to be able to group clashes. So rather than saying there's 10,000 individual clashes, ideally we want to be able to say, actually, there's sort of 300 types of clash, and they can be all resolved in similar ways rather than individually resolved. So to think about what we've just talked about, repetitive processes, time critical, looking at rules and grouping things, that's all perfect candidate for automation. Then in terms of multiple file formats, multiple stakeholders, and sharing that information, that's where 3D Repo comes in. So really what we're saying is the best thing we could do is run a clash detection and then share that data with 3D Repo so that it can then be distributed to a wider audience. So in terms of that initial clash detection, what we look at as product director, what I look at when we're looking at the direction we want to take 3D Repo is we don't want to build me too features. If there is a best-in-class tool out there, and we think Navisworks, for what it does with clash detection, at least on the front end, the engine it's using, it is best in class. Let's not try and compete with them, because we'll spend a year of engineering just working to build a Me Too feature. We'll leverage what they can do, and then we'll combine it with the power of 3D Repo. So what we're looking at doing is saying, well, one person can run that clash detection inside Navisworks. Via the APIs, they can then share that to 3D Repo, which can then go out to a wider audience, which would have been much harder just inside Navisworks, because suddenly you're having to throw NWD files around. So what does that look like from a workflow? Run your clash detection in Navisworks. We've got an integration using Dynamo, which I'll show you quickly, our example integration, that will send that to 3D Repo. We want you to be able to manage your clashes in 3D Repo, share them out, set the priorities and things like that, potentially visualize them inside your kind of visualization tools, send the clash statuses back to Navisworks in case you've got one of those deliverables we talked about before. And then as new models come in, we're constantly revisiting this cycle, and the whole thing can be automated. And really, when we're looking for manual intervention, it's in this managed clashes in 3D Repo. So that's when we're sending it out to people and saying, can you close this clash out? So for anyone that's not familiar with Dynamo, Dynamo is typically used for kind of generative design inside Revit. There is a plugin for Navisworks, and there's also now a Civil 3D Dynamo plugin. But because of the nature of Dynamo, you can also add additional data points in. So you can add Python scripts and other things. And that's where we're going to be using Dynamo in the clash detection workflow today. So a little example of how we've done Dynamo stuff before in the past. We have got a script which basically takes safety-based risks. So anyone familiar with recording safety-based risks in 3D Repo, you can record health and safety or CDM risks inside 3D Repo and pull those risks back down into Revit so that you can record them onto 2D sheets. So if your contract deliverable is still saying we need risks on our 2D sheets that are going into our common data environment, but you want to work in the new world process, which is recording those risks in a 3D environment, you can still do that. We'll still facilitate that using Dynamo. So onto the demo. Let me just get Dynamo up. So this is the Dynamo script I'm going to be using for the demo today. What we do is we identify a Navisworks file, we open it up, and I'm using the Dynaworks 21 module for this. So this is using Navisworks 2021, and this gives you a lot of basically API level actions that you can perform to Navisworks files. So you can either extract all the data inside a Navisworks file, you can append additional files to a Navisworks file. So you could actually download models directly from your common data environment using an API, add those to a Navisworks file, run a clash detection, export that clash detection to 3D Repo, and then start running your process. So we get an existing clash detection, we get the results, and then what we do is we take the camera viewpoint from Navisworks so that we can make sure that we're putting the camera in the same place in 3D Repo. We take those points of the camera, and then what we also do is we identify the actual elements that are clashing inside Navisworks. So not only are we moving the camera to the right place, we're also highlighting the two objects that are the result of that clash. And then using this Python script here, which is very simple, if I just go into here, we basically push that data to the 3D Repo API endpoint in a format that 3D Repo understands, and then suddenly those clashes are available inside 3D Repo. So what that looks like very quickly, a clash point of view, is if I go to my clash results here, and I go to, let's say, clash number 10, you can skip through these and you can see all the hard clashes I'm having between my structural and my architectural models. And then if I jump over to 3D Repo, just realized I didn't have the right model loaded, so I can see the exact same clashes here. So those are now processed in 3D Repo. And if I go to clash 10, you'll see we go to the same camera viewpoint. We've got the same objects. We'll just zip back to clash 10 here. So we've got the same objects here. So I can start now tracking my issues in 3D Repo. And then if I want to, once all my issues have been closed out, I can reverse that Dynamo script to push the results back into 3D Repo. So what does this mean from a benefits point of view? So first of all, you can execute clashes without manually opening Navisworks. Clashes could be grouped to reduce the total number so that you can basically start to build your Dynamo workflow up to mitigate some of the manual stuff you're doing in clash detection. So if you wanted to say anywhere where a column of a particular type is clashing with a slab, I want to group those all together and only create one 3D Repo issue rather than 100 issues that exist inside Navisworks. And you can continue to add business logic to this. So this is an evolving process. So we can get you started with our kind of off-the-shelf script that I've shown you today. And then you can start to build business logic out. And then hopefully across multiple projects, you'll start to really reduce the amount of manual handle turning that you're doing on these projects. And then another example that I just want to show you here is once you've got those, sorry, I'm just trying to get rid of the Zoom panel at the top here. Once you've got those issues inside 3D Repo, of course, using the 3D Repo APIs and the dashboards you can download from the 3drepo.com website, you can start to pull that data out into Power BI and have a live dashboard tracking issues that were generated from those clashes. So suddenly you're going from a single person desktop process into a massive users inside 3D Repo, but not just that, viewers inside your Power BI dashboard. So you could have 50 people looking at the model inside Power BI and then 1,000 people looking at the results. Sorry, 50 people looking at the model inside 3D Repo, and 1,000 people looking at the results inside Power BI. So suddenly you're going from that one person to 1,000 relatively straightforward. So what does the future look like for this? We're hoping that we can keep developing this with our customers to start auto-updating on contract deliverables. So where the contract deliverable is a Navisworks file back in the common data environment with all the clashes closed out or commented on, we can start to push those through using Dynamo. We want to look at dashboarding, more reports, and things that we can automate, potentially automating the response to submitters. So using that no-code platform like Power Automate, once the model lands in the common data environment, it goes into 3D Repo, the clash detection gets run inside Navisworks, pushed to 3D Repo, the results get assigned to individuals. Those individuals then get notified with a report in their inbox within a couple of hours of submitting the model in the first instance. And then again, back to what we were talking about with the model validation, what can we do with machine learning here? How can we start to understand clashes of a similar nature? And that's really one of the benefits of putting all this data that is typically in proprietary desktop software into 3D Repo, where we've got all the APIs, we're exposing everything in very standard formats that we can start to feed into machine learning. But again, it takes that training data, it takes the legwork of doing it for the first couple of projects manually before you can start to then get the machine learning processing. So with that, I'm going to take a breather for a second and move on to questions. Actually, first, I think I've got a poll just while we're waiting for the questions to come in. So let me get the
polls there. Also, that's great, Matt. Thanks for that. So yeah, there's a poll here around the clash detection process that you guys can answer. While we're waiting, do keep the questions coming in. I know we're kind of hitting time, but we're happy to stay behind and answer more. So yeah, feel free to keep them coming. So I'm just going to go from the top. Some of them are a bit more general, but the first one is around, do we have support for Asta Power Project BIM? Matt, kind of.
Yes.
I guess.
Yeah, so it's a work in progress. We've been working with the team at Power Project at various points where we can basically pull 4D information from Asta straight into 3D Repo, and you can use our 4D sequencing tool inside 3D Repo. So it's something that we're working on. Ideally, we want that lighthouse customer to join us so that we can start driving the development and really make it work. Because otherwise, if it's just two software companies building an integration, it might not be exactly what the industry needs. So it's always helpful for us to have that lighthouse customer that knows what they want. We can work with them to build up the process and get it in the platform. So if you are that lighthouse customer, please get in touch.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a similar type question answer to the next one, which is, have we worked out how to do model push from viewpoint, I guess, for projects? The answer to that is we can keep talking for projects. I think it seems like it's going to be a tough one for us to get an out of the box integration like we have with some of the other vendors at this point. But I think as a one-off custom integration for a client is possible. So yeah, definitely worth having a chat about that one. So reach out. We can do that. I'm not really sure of the time or cost involved in it yet, but yeah, it's something we can investigate on a custom development level. Next one, what security standard encryption does 3D Repo have, and where is the data stored? So I said earlier, data can be stored wherever you want. Out of the box, the 3D Repo that you can sign up and use, like the SaaS offering, is hosted in London on AWS. The encryption for transfer is standard HTTPS. I'm not sure about at rest in terms of the encryption type, but if you are really interested, drop an email to support@3drepo.com and we will get you the actual answer for that. We've got a few more coming around. What if the process requires a different kind of schema, Matt, in terms of the fields and stuff that we have in 3D Repo?
Yeah, so that's always the challenge that we find working with 3D models in the industry, and that's why that's why I mentioned before that 3D Repo isn't prescriptive. What we try and do is give you the foundational tools to build your own processes on top of. So for particular projects where you're using IFC, for example, you've got the benefit of having a unique GUID for every element. So every element has that unique 16-character string. It's easy to identify. When you're working with civil 3D models or things like that, maybe you don't have that luxury. So that's why we give you the foundations. We're always on hand to offer consultancy or support so that we can take our existing processes and try and adapt them for your workflows, with the hope that once you've done that once, any project that you're working on which is similar, you'll be able to reuse and recycle the work that you've done.
Yeah. How do we get hold of the Dynamo and Python scripts to push and pull from Navisworks? I think at this stage, it's not ready for release as a product. If you are an existing 3D Repo user with a commercial agreement with us, get in touch. We're looking for people to come and kind of collaborate on this with us and carry on developing it out. It probably will end up being an open source project. Not quite sure yet. It is very much in the research phase. But yeah, if you're an existing customer, do reach out and we're happy to collaborate with you on it. Not sure I understand that question. What's the learning curve? Right, what's the learning curve for the workflow? Training time not included for Dynamo, and how outputs can be shared to all parties, including people not working in software like Revit or Navisworks. So the learning curve for using 3D Repo is very short, and I guess 3D Repo is the answer to how you get stuff out to other people. So the issues and clashes that have been uploaded into 3D Repo are then available via a web browser to anyone who you give access to. So again, they don't need access to Revit or Navisworks. I guess the actual workflow in terms of the Dynamo stuff, we're not sure yet. We haven't really taught anyone. We're still kind of developing the workflow ourselves.
Yeah, so just to expand on that as well, we've got training on the 3drepo.com website. So anyone who's looking to deploy 3D Repo to those 50, 100 user projects, we have some sort of training, self-guided training that takes 2 to 3 hours on our website with quizzes, so that you can kind of, you don't have the burden of trying to teach people new software. And then also with a lot of the integration stuff in the Dynamo, what we often find is there's often someone in the business, an architecture technologist, a particularly inventive QS or something like that, that understands these tools. So it's just about finding the right person to build the workflow. But once that workflow is built, technically no one really needs to manage it. It just needs to be maintained, maybe if you're working on different projects and your variables change and things like that.
Yeah, and last one, is it possible to add custom fields to the issue tracker?
Yeah, so this is something we've been getting a question actually we've had from a lot of customers, especially with our safety-based module, where we've got our kind of discovering safety-backed, safety-based schema, but we're working with customers that say, actually, I've got additional fields that I need for this particular project. So what we have coming out towards the tail end of November is a feature we're calling custom tickets, which allows you to basically create forms, or we'll create the forms for you if you don't want to do it yourself. Create forms for issues, so that rather than taking the standard BCF schema that we've kind of already got in 3D Repo, you can build out whatever schema you want for whatever purpose, whether that's constructability issues, clashes, it could be on-site issues, it could be logistics issues, it could be model validation issues. Each one of those is going to have potentially a different schema. And then you're going to be able to access those both inside the browser using the UI, but also via the API. So similar to this workflow, you can start to push clashes to our custom tickets feature and have all of the fields that you're used to seeing in Navisworks populate inside.
Yeah, so look out for a webinar coming soon on that feature towards the end of November. Okay, I think that's it for the questions. Thanks very much for joining. This webinar was recorded. It might take us a bit of time to get it sorted out and up, but it will be sent out to everyone that attended. And yeah, thanks very much. If you do have any further questions, please drop either me or Matt an email. You can email us at support@3drepo.com is probably the quickest and easiest way to do that, or via the contact us page on the website. And yeah, and if you don't already have one, don't forget that 3D Repo does have a free account. You can sign up and try some of these processes out for yourself. The free account works with all of the existing APIs and plugins. The only limitation is you only have 100 megabytes of space, so just for a small model. But yeah, get in touch and if you want to take it any further. Thanks very much. Cheers, Matt, and yeah, speak to you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.